the We Are Ready podcast today. I'm your host, Jack. We have a great panel for you discussing DeFi today. We have one of the thinkers in the space that, well, I would have high respect for all of these thinkers here today. That's why I assembled this panel in this way. But Styled Pigeon, who is a great storyteller, writer, thinker, we also have Mel from Thea Petra, who founded this real estate project on the blockchain with real world implications. And we also have Diego May of Bitflow Finance. Looking forward to bringing those guys on. But first, let's go ahead and talk about our sponsor, Flagship. Flagship is a investment product, a DAO, an educational tool, and more. We've watched crypto in 14 years, starting with Bitcoin, with very humble beginnings, turn into a multi-trillion dollar asset class. Um, and despite those kinds of crazy numbers, the reality is we're still quite early. One of the problems with crypto is that there is just a massive volume of information and new projects coming online all the time. It can be very hard for new entrants or people who do not live and breathe this stuff to stay appraised of the whole situation. So Flagship is your gateway to the most promising assets in the crypto industry. This platform is designed to help you gain an edge by curating the best opportunities in the industry, guided by captains. I am, for instance, the captain of the Stacks Outposts, from DeFi, which we'll be discussing today, to the metaverse. A user can use the Flagship vaults to get access to the hottest sectors with just one simple transaction. With Flagship, you'll always be in control of your funds. And as a DAO, a member of that community is a part owner of that community. And so I invite you all to go check out Flagship, join us in shaping the future, get involved, and come stop by the Discord and say hi anytime. This is just the beginning. As we go forward, and interestingly enough, today when we're talking about things like real estate and the blockchain, understand that more assets will become tokenized. Stocks, commodities, art, and Flagship will be your ultimate investment platform in this new digital world. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
All right.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning. It looks like Jack might be frozen. There we go. We're seeing some movement.
There we are. Yep. Here we go. Good morning. How's that? How y'all doing? Thank you so much for coming on today. Let's go through the panel and just introduce yourself, talk about what you're working on, and let's go ahead and start with you, Styled. What you got going on today for us, man?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Pigeon. You can call me Taylor if you want. I don't really care either way. I'm not trying to hide my identity or anything. I am a thinker, writer, and amateur in the space, and would love to dive into DeFi a little bit more. Thinking is what I do best at the 30,000 foot level. I love to do that. It's been my hobby for a really long time. And obviously crypto gives me plenty of that to do. So if you want to check out my stuff, head over to styledpigeon.com, and that's my plug.
Nice. All right, Diego.
Yes, good morning. So I'm Diego. I've been a marketeer for about 12, 13 years. Got into the crypto space around 2017. Last year, I founded Bitflow. during the Stacks Accelerator or pre-accelerator. And BitFlow is a decentralized exchange. And we were leveraging the security and capital and network of layer 1 Bitcoin. So we consider ourselves the first Bitcoin DEX. We are a seed stage company, and our movement is towards the decentralized financial system. But the whole vision is really replacing the malicious middleman with smart contracts and decentralized liquidity pools. You cannot trust people, as we've seen, but you can trust code. So looking forward to this call.
Awesome. Thank you, Diego. And Mel, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your project, sir?
Absolutely. Good morning, guys. My name is Mel. I've been in the industry. Originally got first exposed to it in about 2015. Ended up going all in, same as Diego there, 2017, 2018. And I'm the founder of EP4, which is a real world asset project that is positioning to become a digital network state that is built on Ethereum.
Cool. Yeah, this is awesome, and DeFi is a subject that I'm quite fond of, and not just because my first real bull run experience took place. Well, let's say just when I was winning took place during the original DeFi summer. But I like DeFi because I feel as though this is the direction we have to head in. And I feel it's going to be important to establish what DeFi is, for the audience, for people watching. I think that's the onus is on us to explain this to the consumer and the retail participant. And really we're starting to see in these past few weeks with, the SEC attacking the most, let's call Coinbase what it is. It's the most trusted entity in US crypto, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they've trying to play by the rules. Then we see politicians trying to carry water for Wall Street and the banks by attacking crypto. And so I think at its core, what DeFi does is what crypto does, which puts everybody on an even playing field. I love this clip. Yeah, let's talk about this real quick. This was pretty awesome. I think this was from Consensus. That's Muneeb. He's one of the founders of Stacks, and I just thought that was great when I saw that. I wanted to get y'all's input on that tweet if you hadn't seen it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Warren has been taking this interesting anti-crypto crusade, I think, as her strategy for these upcoming elections. And I actually think I just saw yesterday that she couldn't get any sponsors for that crypto bill that she was trying to propose. I'm sure anyone with common sense knows that you probably don't want to push all this innovation across seas. And with her super hyper aggressive stance, it's fairly obvious that there's potentially a misaligned agenda there as well. Just the way she's kind of taken it there. And I think any rational person, even if you are anti-crypto, I think if you're semi-rational at all, you could say, well, let's at least pump the brakes and explore this and see what kind of regulatory framework we can have. Very similar to AI. They're proposing similar frameworks to AI as well. So I think those two industries staying within the United States is super critical for the US.
No, 100%, man. So Diego, let me ask you, what does DeFi mean to you, and what does DeFi mean to the consumer in your mind?
Well, I think if you take it back and you think about all of the US and world economic crisis from the bubble in 2008, initial early 2000, early 90s, especially the 80s, or move from gold standard to fiat standard in the 70s. I think that's where the problem actually started. We haven't seen financial products made for the working middle class or anybody else except the ultra rich. A lot of these products, especially the financial products that came after 80, 83, 84, 85, these were basically loopholes that were packaged and repackaged as financial products, right? We're talking about not only the mortgage, but college loans, We have whole life insurance. We have Roth IRA. We have all of these products that were created as a way to defend the privilege. Like I always say, like you can either support freedom in the financial market or you support privilege in the financial market. There is no in between, right? And I think DeFi is the first product that has a broader spectrum. Like this is the first financial. We don't know how this is going to evolve. I am pretty sure it's going to change a lot in the next 2-3 years, but I'm very optimistic because this is the first product that it's at least reaching a wider audience, and we're getting to talk about it, and we're getting to decide what the future holds for the regular Joe, right? As opposed to just a minimum amount of people that have access to these tax loopholes, to these, to these whole life insurance, to this, all these other financial products that were created for the benefit of a specific class. So,
yeah, very well said, Diego. I think that this whole idea of bringing financial services to the unbanked, which ultimately is one of the great equalizers of Bitcoin, but being able to bring financial services, like you said, to the average Joe is huge. And after 2008, after that real estate crash, that's when they kind of blame the crash on too much leverage in the market, right? So they made this rule where you have to be an accredited investor and have X amount of liquid assets to be able to do things like buy IPOs, for instance. When a company takes its stock public, you have to be an accredited investor to buy, right? And if you look at any chart, that's where the money's made. All these people buy low, they get a lot of what's that fake meat company? Oh, Beyond Meat. Okay, so take like Beyond Meat, those guys, they get this IPO that it goes through the roof. I'm sitting there watching this as a trader, like I cannot wait to short the dog shit out of this, but like how many people in retail bought they couldn't have bought before, and it's just unfair. And even now this week they're talking about changing the accredited investor rule to having something like $10 million worth of assets. So it speaks truth to what you're saying about, it seems as though the financial system is rigged in such a way to benefit a specific class of people at the exclusion of everybody else. And I think that is the narrative of crypto. I think that is the narrative of Bitcoin. And Styled is one of the newer people here, but what's your take on all this so far as we discuss this morning?
Well, I tend to stay a little higher level. Again, I'm not good at math is what I tell people. So like when it gets into math, I kind of bow out. I let that go to the smarter people than me. But it reminds me of my family used to play this board game called Cash Flow, which was designed by Robert Kiyosaki. And it's a really fun board game where you start out in the rat race and you have to like build capital and passive income in order to escape that track and get on the fast track. And then you have to like buy a dream or something to win the game, right? Super motivational speaker type board game, but it was a lot of fun. And as a kid, it taught me a lot about cash flow and how passive income works. Not that I've been able to put any of that into practice very well. But regardless, that game is a nice set of rules. And so me and a buddy were playing one night and we were like, what's not included in this is a credit system. So we designed this whole credit system to be able to play the game on credit. But of course, the game's not designed for that. So our credit system completely broke the flow of the game. And all of a sudden we're like, yes, I'll take a $5 billion loan and buy everything that I want in the game.
Sounds like BlackRock.
And that's exactly my point, right? Is like when you can change the rules of the game to your advantage, then the whole system breaks. And if there were retail investors or somebody on the other end of this board game that we were playing, they would have been totally screwed by what we were doing, because we're just pulling money out of the system as fast as we could and investing it in this, and then that feeds back into our pockets, right? And so if you see things growing in a way where all of a sudden there's a small group of people who control what the rule set is, well, that's obviously a problem, right? Because they're not going to be, as much as they will promise 6 ways from Sunday that they're going to be just and trustworthy. Like Diego said, you can't trust people. That's the problem, is that people are not trustworthy 100% of the time. So that's what I see as being like kind of the core message of what DeFi is let's make a system where the rules in each system are predetermined so that we don't have to constantly deal with somebody up top changing the rules, where you have the 2008 crash, they blame it on everybody but the people who actually caused the issue in the first place. So that's kind of my high level take on DeFi. And I'll also say in this diatribe that I think it is incumbent on us, like Jack said, to take these like high level ideas, and instead of getting into the nitty gritty and all the weeds and everything, though that's important, that needs to be out there for transparency's sake. Nobody buys into something they don't understand. So it's a massive deal for us to be having these conversations where it's like, okay, here's the problem. Here's a potential solution. Hey, people, do you think that will work for you, or are we going in the wrong direction? And that's when we get into all the regulatory stuff where, again, you can't trust people. So I don't blame them for asking questions as long as they'll try and do it honestly. We're here for the answers.
Right. No, that's beautiful, man. And it reminded me of something I saw yesterday on Twitter. I can't remember the publication, the link to the publication, but basically, they were blaming millennials on the price of housing in this country. And I mean, it's really, let's just find any scapegoat possible, right? Let's take the generation that has had a extraordinarily short end of the stick, right? I mean, every graph you look at in terms of asset ownership, it is clear, millennials are struggling, Zoomers, they're just starting out, they're struggling. But this blame game of not looking at anything but the real problems, which is, I think, at the actual base of the problem, is that in my lifetime, there was never an opportunity to take money and just cash US dollars and put it in a bond or a CD and get any kind of return on it at all. Meanwhile, every year, inflation goes up, so your savings are just dwindling, right? So now we live in this system where, okay, you have to figure out some way to lever your funds just to break even. Whereas my grandfather, my great grandfather, they, the extent that they even saw money in the first place, because you go back far enough. It's funny. I had a cousin. He was much older than me. He was like a third cousin. He's like 85. He was telling me one day, he's like, I didn't even see my first dollar bill until I was like 10 years old. I mean, these are people who still kind of like lived off the land, right? And did a lot of bartering. But the fact is, like, most people back then, they could take their gold or that they got or whatever and just save it, and then just pass that through the family, and a family could generationally build wealth. And because of, our banking policies, we find ourselves in a situation where you can't build wealth like that. So now you have Bitcoin, now you have DeFi, and all of the people who are in theory supposed to work towards the greater good of everybody are just attacking this, and it's backwards. It's completely backwards. So what we see is the people who have a lot of assets, they're in a great situation. You could borrow money at almost no interest for years and years and years, buy more assets, and I just really have a hard time, reading something like that and thinking someone wrote this with a straight face. It's unfair, and housing especially, and that's a cool thing about what you're doing with Theopetra, Mel. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for Thea Petra, where we're going, you know, the progress and some goals, because this is uncharted territory. That's the thing that really strikes me about what's going on with Theo. It's like, okay, this is a problem. We have no roadmap. This is completely just new territory. We're explorers. We're going to try to solve a problem, try to figure this out. And that takes a lot of guts and it takes a lot of vision. So tell us a little bit about what you got going on, starting with your initial inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of give context, I moved out to California in about 2015. I'm originally from Missouri, so I went from a conservative state out to California, which are two complete polar opposites, as you can imagine. And I got to kind of witness the housing nonsense kind of firsthand. And when I dove into it, the first thing that I noticed is, yes, there is rent control, but rent control caps your rents. The landlord can only increase between 3 to 10%, meaning your most expensive bill for most families is going to be your rent, meaning this can increase 3 to 10% on any given year on a compounding fashion. And when you extrapolate that, when you look at what HUD is doing, which is they're essentially giving out stimulus checks, which is Section 8 to help subsidize that, their government's kind of left in a really weird spot, which is either you could subsidize the housing, but if the housing is rising at 3 to 10%, that means you're constantly printing or taxing the American people as well. Number two, they could try to build housing. That's not really efficient. Number three, which is our kind of proposal, which is instead of monetizing directly from the residents, can you have other ways of monetization, right? So for example, can you monetize other parts of the liquidity stack that are currently not being tapped into? Can you monetize the actual liquidity fees themselves, for example? Can you create any sort of other efficiencies possible without going to the residents first? It's kind of like the experiment behind Thea Petra. And just trying to see how much can DeFi push that threshold and you know, potentially have a better rent cap than what, you know, current states are doing. So that's kind of like the high level thesis behind Theo is, you know, can we have a rent cap that is more aggressive than the proposed rent controls of what, you know, what states are doing, and have it more sustainable as well, is kind of the proposal or the experiment they were kind of running behind Theo.
It's really cool, man, and hats off to you. And I think that's the mindset we have to have, especially right now in this world, not just this country, is if you can look at your surroundings and be like, something is terribly wrong here. So this isn't working. You really need people to step up and say, how do we fix it? You know, we're not going to ask Elizabeth Warren to fix our problems. We're not going to ask the Federal Reserve to fix our problems. You know, we have to try to do this ourselves. And so that's one of the major reasons why I love this space so much, is because we now have the tools to have our own money. That is such a radical concept in so many different ways. And so now we build. And I do worry, you know, it is discouraging to see, on one hand, all of these regulators and all of these special interests constantly attacking crypto. But by the same token, why wouldn't they? Right? I mean, we're talking about an entire group of people worldwide who have benefited greatly off of predatory lending, off of you know, being able to own almost everything. I mean, you have organizations that literally say, hey, you're going to own nothing and you're going to be fine with it. And we're the antithesis of that. And so we naturally, they're going to fight us. And that's okay, because me personally, I don't think they can stop us. And Diego, when we're talking about doing things like having DEXs versus SEX versus you know, a decentralized versus centralized exchange, in my mind at least, you know, a decentralized exchange is better than a centralized exchange. You don't have that attack point for hostile regulators with bad intent. I'd like to get your thought on this a little bit, because on this panel, we have two projects featured that are definitely in the crosshairs, of regulators, of, government officials who have special interests at heart, and not, our interests. So let's talk a little bit about, why did you choose to build a DEX, and what do you think about this topic of a decentralized exchange versus a centralized exchange?
Yeah, well, it's a good point, Jack. I mean, the state of crypto now, we have evolved from this like speculative frenzy, and we're maturing to a more, normal ecosystem. I think we've seen, not all centralized exchanges are bad, but we've seen what the bad ones can do. They can cause, a huge dent, stealing billions of dollars. FTX, Celsius. We've also seen a distrust. Trust in the U.S. Institution has hit record low. And in this sort of scenario, we're starting to see that people are starting to become more aware of the risks associated with centralized exchanges, and they're moving towards decentralized exchanges, right? One comparison is like Coinbase. I think the last report had 108 million users, and Uniswap just under 5, I think 4.8. But in the last couple of months, Uniswap has surpassed Coinbase in the total volume of transactions, on-chain transactions, right? And we're starting to see this graph just going all the way up to the right. Even though we're not, like we can say we're still in a bull market, we are seeing this sort of behavior. And these early adopters of decentralized exchange is a signal to what's coming in the next bull market, right? So the total value of locked in DeFi is still up to the right. That is still growing. It doesn't matter what the situation in the market is. The number of unique addresses in DeFi is also growing. So I think that's important, because people are starting to realize that decentralized money needs decentralized protocols. Like, wow, right? Like,
well said.
I mean, not a huge finding, but it's like it is something that people are just experimenting with, and are starting to understand the benefits of DeFi. But imagine, this financial system where you can trust people with your token, you can trust people, and systems and protocols that if something happens, the money goes back to your wallet. So that's one of the trends that we're seeing. And that's something that we're very excited about, because you do have Uniswap, Curve, MakerDAO, all of these decentralized exchanges on Ethereum, but we don't have one yet on Bitcoin, and that's where Bitflow comes in. We're really leveraging the power of Bitcoin. I think everybody agrees that Bitcoin is the most solid, stable crypto asset in a way, and we want to be able to leverage that as much as possible with trustless peg in and peg out of your Bitcoin that you can put in, get out, invest, earn real yield. I think that's also important, because a lot of these players in the market have been paying yield or their dividends in format of governance token. These governance tokens are inflationary. They have lost 90, 95, 99% of their all-time value. You do have to swap for another asset. So it's almost like they're recreating a problem that shouldn't even exist, right? If I'm putting Bitcoin in, if I'm putting Ethereum in, whatever token I'm putting in, I expect to get that same underlying token back as part of my yield. And that's something that we truly believe in. Real yield, as much, that sounds like weird, like I'm playing real yield. That's what we're aiming for. So
that's cool, man. And it really speaks to the fact that there's only 21 million Bitcoin, right? So, what I've seen various estimates on, well, if you own 0.28 Bitcoin, you're like in the top 1% of Bitcoin holders. And I think that if we're going to grow the Bitcoin economy, we do have to have ways where people can borrow and lend asset like Bitcoin. It has to be done. I mean, this is cool, and it's so cool seeing it come to being available on stacks. It shows the power of proof of transfer and the relationship between Bitcoin and stacks, and we'll see that highlighted even more with like SBTC. Pigeon, when you're hearing these things and being someone who is a high level thinker, how would you take someone completely green to crypto and kind of try to educate them about this topic? Where would you start?
Well, it does depend on the person a good bit, and where they're at in their financial journey. But if I had to give a standardized way of doing it, I start with complaints about money. Like, what problems do you have with your money that you'd like to figure out or solve? And that whole thought train leads back to, in my mind, politics, actually. So we look back at history and we see the progression of things, and it's this push and pull between freedom and tyranny throughout history, right? And that is very apparent to watch when it comes to government structures and things, because you see a movement from monarchies or empires to oligarchies got tried for a little while. We may be trying one here. And then eventually we had this idea of democracy, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, democracy, of course. Why haven't we thought about this before? Why don't we disperse all of the power, and then maybe we can all work together to make things as good as possible for as many people as possible? That sounds brilliant. What we haven't seen yet is the actual democratization of money. Money has still always been a centrally controlled ecosystem, right? Except for maybe barter systems, but obviously that's not very efficient or effective when it comes to a globalized society where we're trying to make the entire tide rise for everyone across the globe. I mean, that's a unbelievably huge task, and I respect the heck out of people like Diego and Mel and Jack for being able to push this out and say, we're gonna literally change the world, the way that everyone lives. That's an incredible goal to have, and I think that the delegation of this responsibility to everyone is a necessity. That's why we talk about decentralization, right? Nobody's coming to save us. There is no one that's coming to help. We have to actually, it drives me crazy because we see all of like the Marvel movies and everything, and there's this story that's being told where we're kind of waiting for Iron Man to come and help, right? I want the billionaire to build the cool exosuit that rescues the whole planet. But in reality, that's not really the way things work. All of those stories are originally intended to say, no, you're the one who's supposed to be the hero. You have to build the exosuit that saves the planet. That's why almost all of those heroic myths and things start with the everyman. It starts with just some Joe Schmo who goes, I've got this problem and nobody else seems to be fixing it, so I guess I'm going to wing it. And that's one of the things that is most easily critical about the blockchain technology is it looks like all you guys are just winging it. Yes, we are, because somebody's got to do it. And that's why we talk about pushing innovation overseas, right? Because we want to be the ones doing this innovation so that we can make sure that it's done as much in truth as possible. And I think that story is one of the things that needs to be ever present in our messaging. I also come from a sales background, so a lot of when I hear about Bitflow, when I hear about Theopetra, I'm thinking about and Nick's got up one of the fun myths that I wrote that's up on my website because I like to play with these ideas so much. when it comes to these new products, we have to have these narratives that are ever present, that expose to the individual, the buyer, the person that we're actually trying to benefit, what it is we're even trying to do. And then you can tie in your product story and say, hey, this is how this product fixes this problem. We think we're doing everything that we can to develop this to where it is decentralized to the maximum extent possible. And then we're also putting in hedges to help prevent things via protocol that we know will happen down the line as we decentralize more and more and more, right? Because an outright democracy doesn't necessarily work very well, because somebody can buy up all the power, play some politics, and get look at Emperor Palpatine, right? For your security and safety, right? That's why we're creating the empire. And that all came from a democratic republic, which was the US federal government. It's technically a democratic republic, right? So we're watching literally the prequels from Star Wars play out in our real world right now, and no one's telling the right story anymore, which I guess is really why I'm in this space to begin with, is to tell these stories. But I can't do the product stuff. You guys are creating the products for me to say, these are the things that fit into this story, and this is how we can potentially save ourselves, given that nobody else is going to be able to.
Right.
So does that even connect to your question? I'm sorry.
100%, man. Because
okay,
at the core of what you're saying is something that it was an observation that I actually learned talking to you. It's something I hadn't given much thought of in the past. That one of the biggest hurdles we have in this space, just in life in general on this planet, is a lack of personal responsibility. Okay, when you get that Bitcoin, that is your responsibility, and I don't know how we change this paradigm that we have in the West, especially where you're just not responsible for anything. Everything's someone else's fault. Everything's someone else's job. This is not for you. You're gonna sit around and play video games all day. Get high as a kite and just not really care. So
trigger.
I don't.
Number one.
I don't really think that we can change that dynamic overnight. But I think it's like anything else, because as you said before, as we find ourselves going from a constitutional republic into something else, much like in the Star Wars story, that took place in baby steps, right? So I think a part of what we have to do here is create baby steps going in the opposite direction of how to encourage people to make it a little bit easier to kind of get them to that point where they can become financially sovereign. And so I think I'd like to take a few minutes here and talk about what are the tools that we need in this space to make this money, this technology, more accessible and more mainstream going forward. And so Mel, let's hear some thoughts on that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to accelerate DeFi, I would say first thing that we need is easier way to onboard people. I think it's way too complicated right now. Downloading a wallet, going through all these processes, kind of going through the education process just to be able to utilize the software. I think right now it's far too complicated. I would say the second piece is probably cost. Borrowing on something like Aave, it's far too expensive still to use DeFi. So I think for the DeFi space to really get true adoption, there needs to be an ease of adoption, streamlined process, and it needs to be cheaper, because I don't think anybody cares about decentralization enough to pay a hell of a lot higher interest, right? They're still going to go to their bank. They're going to do whatever they need to do. So I think those are the two main things is streamlining and cost for sure.
Cool. Yeah. It's fair points. I mean, especially with Ethereum, right? It's back when, but before DeFi summer, you could make Ethereum transactions for, pennies on the dollar, basically. Yep. And then I found myself towards the end of the DeFi craze trying to trade or cash out and having, you know, $300, $400 gas fees. You know, it's just insane. So if you're not moving size, you know, what's the point? So Diego, the same topic. What do you think? What do you think are ways to build this to be more suited towards mass adoption and personal responsibility?
Well, I think agreeing to both Mel and Pigeon here, education. I think that's my first premise here. The markets have been very complex, financial markets, the legal markets. They're using all these, you know, crazy jargons, and that's very hard for the regular user. And going back to Pigeon, the narrative of how you present this and the way you present these new financial products, we need to break that barrier of entry, which has been established in the ecosystem of using complex language, of using complex systems, and using, you know, like you said, even being accredited investors to get in. I think that's important. But we do need to educate people on the benefits on it. And back to what Mel was saying, even if the benefits are there, but it's still costly, there's still a barrier of entry. User experience is not there yet. I mean, the reason we're seeing Coinbase, Robinhood, you know, Crypto.com gain market share is because they created easy to use applications on your phone. You don't have to go in a computer. You don't have to set up your Bitcoin node. You don't have to get, you know, keys. Like it makes it very easy for the end user to just go in, buy some crypto and hold and maybe earn something directly on the same platform. And I think that's where decentralized exchanges and DeFi is catching up. These are some of the challenges, and I think we need to overcome them with education, with avoiding any sort of complex word. I mean, what is farming? What is staking? Right? Try to explain that to your dad. Right?
Preach.
And why not, you know, locking up your token in a farm? Like why not scrolling? Like you know, a word that we use all the time. Like, so I think that's what we need to do. We need to democratize the language. We need to make the narrative, you know, work for everybody. We need to make it easy for you to jump on, like on and off ramp, which is also a challenge because we need this transition period. Like we can't just ignore the US dollar, which is backed 50% by the US military. We can't ignore euro because we need this transition period. We need on and off ramp applications that do the KYC. So the regular Joe can come in and jump on crypto. He doesn't care about KYC. He doesn't really care much about the real benefits of decentralized exchange. But it's like flying a plane, right? I can't fly a plane, but I ride on a plane. I don't know how it flies, but I'm still there. I trust the mechanism. I trust the pilot. I trust the engines. And that's the same thing. I think it's just going to be a transition to where most people are hopefully using DeFi without even knowing that they're using DeFi, and they're reaping those benefits in.
Fair enough. And those are some great points. You know, I personally have no idea how my backup camera in my vehicles work, but I use them every day. And yeah, that's perfect. So Styled, what I'm hearing is there is opportunity just in making this more accessible to the everyday person. Like Diego said, explaining it to your father. That's a wonderful way to approach this and try to figure out, like, how do you explain this to somebody and make it make sense? Well, go to somebody who literally this is all foreign to them. If it can make sense to them, then it can make sense to anybody. So as a storyteller and a thinker, what if you were going to try to craft a narrative for, you know, the superiority of DeFi versus even CeFi or crypto versus the TradFi system? You know, what messaging, what really are you trying to get across?
Well, okay, so if I had to do it in a super pitchy sort of way, I'd say, and maybe you can role play this with me a little bit, Jack. Do you like cars?
Love them.
Sweet. I've got a really, really good road building company that I think you should invest in.
Okay.
Okay.
But I thought we were talking about cars.
That's right. Nobody gives a shit about cars if there aren't any roads.
Right.
Okay. Right now, Diego and Mel are building roads. Now, there's going to come a time, and I'm going to use another Star Wars metaphor, actually. There comes a time where we have to also start building the cars, right? And it really, from what I know about both your products, y'all are really like kind of almost building the car, right? But like the roads still aren't quite good enough for you, I would assume, for you to build the car that you really want. Like we're not at Teslas, we're still at Model Ts, right? And that's perfectly fine. It takes time for those things to develop, just as more people help to build that infrastructure. But so far, we've mostly been building for other builders, right? Creating the thing to be able to make the thing. And that's why the car road metaphor, right, is you got to sell people on roads and cars kind of at the same time. So it's a little bit complicated there because we're creating it from the ground up. And kind of out of nowhere, right? Everybody was cool with centralization until suddenly Bitcoin. And you're like, all of a sudden there's this massive paradigm shift. That's actually what Star Wars did for the sci-fi movie industry. I don't know if y'all know this or not, but George Lucas actually had to, when they were doing the prequels, they were actually designing the software that they needed to be able to do the computer generated graphics that they put in the movies. Before that, there was no such thing as, well, there was such thing as computer generated graphics, but they were trash. The softwares that they built were then the infrastructure that other cinematographers got to capitalize on as they were building bigger and bigger franchises. But without Star Wars doing the work first, that never happens, right? So right now, we're sort of in a period with DeFi, from my viewpoint, being somebody who really is kind of an average Joe type person when it comes to all the financial lingo and jargon and whatnot. We're in that period where we're waiting for the Star Wars of DeFi to actually land appropriately, to where now all of a sudden everybody wants to dress up and wait in line for 2 days. We haven't seen that shift yet, and I do think it is because that car road paradigm hasn't grown enough yet, right? So every time I share this with somebody, I tell them about the roads, and I explain, like, look, the reason that none of the answers are there for the questions that you have is because we're still just building the roads. Now, eventually we'll have cars. I don't have any doubt in that at all, right? Because assuming the apocalypse doesn't happen, this is going to continue to progress regardless of how people feel about it. At the very least, there's going to be two camps. One that's like, oh, I love centralized finance, and I just want to give the government all of my money, and that's my civic duty, right? There's going to be those people, but then there's also going to be the other camp that's like, no, we really do believe in freedom and liberty and a lot of the very traditional Western values that we've built our societies on. That's still really important to me. And, you know, I want to keep building those roads so that eventually we can drive.
Man, that's awesome. It really is. Mel, you were talking about Theopetra earlier, and you were calling it the network, you know, like the beginning of your own network state, right? So to speak. So some of the viewers may not be familiar with the network state and the idea behind it. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. You're a real forward-thinking guy, and we're both big fans of that work, I believe. So let's go ahead and delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the power of Web3. I think what interested me the most about it is just the power of the community itself, and you see that behind events like GameStop, for example. Whenever that GameStop scenario, the fiasco went down, the power of the community. The principle of the network state is pretty simple. It's a thesis that communities will eventually bring towards collective action, and they're going to start crowdfunding territories collectively. They're going to just have one unified vision, you know, an identical belief system. They're going to start, you know, buying properties together as well. And then eventually, if you extrapolate that over enough time, these communities could be so big that they could be potentially identified as a sovereign state as well. And that's kind of like the thesis behind the digital network state is can you have a collective of individuals so large that, Bitcoin made you question currency? Can you have a collective of individuals so large that it makes you question what is a country? And that's kind of like the fascinating principle and thesis behind the network state for me.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely well said. Did you have any questions or anything else you want to say?
Yeah. I wanted to actually ask Style a question. He was talking about the roads analogy, which I think is fantastic. Style, would you say that users would only care about two main things, which is the car is built out enough, it's cheap. There's a user who's there just purely because it's easier, it's cheaper. And would you say that there's also a user who's just a lot more idealistic and maybe they don't care that they pay slightly more, but they like where the path is going? Would you say that those are the two main camps? I guess it's like ideological, and then one is just based in, I guess, convenience.
So I wouldn't necessarily separate the two camps. And I think that maybe part of what you're doing is trying to properly target, right? We talk a lot about target market. Like, I want to break down exactly who my target is according to these very specific categories and boxes and things. And while I think that that's necessary at an organizational level to do that, right? Just thinking about sales and how to drive adoption, you definitely have to categorize things, use metrics and KPIs and all that stuff. But when it comes down to actually, if we're talking about the individuals, the actual people, I think there's probably like a slider that's in between those two things, right? Like Diego talks about, explain it to your dad. Dad's concerned about all of the pragmatic things, right? Whereas, if you're talking to a college kid, that, like, let's be honest, college kids are idiots. So they're probably more on that ideological side of things. They're worried about, like, I'm going to change the world. And I fully support that. But, it'll progress and they start to realize, like, oh, okay, these pragmatic things are necessary as well. I need to figure that stuff out too. So I think somebody's typically going to be in that range, right? And the people who are on the more pragmatic side of things, I think, are actually typically a lot easier to actually onboard, by the way, because you can explain something to them. You can say, okay, totally understand your situation. You're trying to do this inexpensively and gain some sort of ROI or advantage to yourself. Totally reasonable, totally get that. And I can explain how our product does that easily. The ideological types will typically lean. So in psychology, they use the Big Five model, and openness is one of those traits. You can predict somebody's political standing pretty much easily based on their openness category, right? More open-minded people tend to be more liberal. They accept new ideas a lot easier, but that comes with its own pitfalls. So if I were to get 1,000 people who are all very open-minded and are totally on board for the ideology part, the second I start talking about something pragmatic, I lose them immediately, because they're here to save the planet or to help the children or something like that. So as soon as I say, well, actually, we need to do this, and that's not the best option for the kids, but it is the best option for everyone as a whole. Okay, now I've just lost all of those targets. They're no longer on board because I'm not doing what I promised them that I would do. And I think that there's a danger there for like Bitcoin and crypto space in general, is we see that and we go, this is a huge selling point, right? As we're going to establish freedom and liberty for everyone financially. But we're not going to be able to deliver that anytime in the next year. So how do I keep my investors investing if that's the only promise that I have? Well, I can't. Eventually, they're going to, call my bluff and say, "Hey, you said you're going to change the world, but, I still have to pay taxes. What's going on?"
Yeah.
And then you'll notice an interesting thing about what I said, right? Is that's when the ideology meets the road, or sorry, the rubber meets the road as far as that ideology goes. Now, all of a sudden, that idealistic person is very concerned with pragmatism.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, wait, well, I thought you said you weren't concerned with that. Now it's all you're talking about. So that spectrum changes. And I think that we have to design our messaging around both and, right? It's this is what we're doing on the ideological front. This is the mechanism by which we're going to accomplish that.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man.
Absolutely.
Diego, you have a strong marketing background, and with all of this talk about regulation and so forth, and the way that the SEC has just been acting like a rogue bouncer in some crappy bar, right? Like,
such a good analogy.
as you, with your background, and while we're talking about being pragmatic, what do you think that we have to do as an industry to kind of sell what we're building? Do we lobby? Do we, community organize? Is it grassroots? Where do you think we're at with that?
I think trying to go, like, you can never go too far out from politics because we are politics, right? So I do have a lot of hope that this new generation that is digital native, that is maybe crypto native, if you were born in 2011, which is crazy, will take the reins and will take those important power positions as we move. But that is a 10 to 20 year timeline. On the short version of it, I do think education is important, but also, I think painting the picture that not everything that we've done in the U.S. from a financial or economic perspective is correct, but that is a very hard sell to boomers, especially, right? They rode this sort of, all the way up to the right, 40 years of growth, 50 years of growth. They got their homes, they got their Roth IRAs, they got their whole life insurance, they got everything. I mean, we're going through in the next 15 to 20 years the largest redistribution of wealth. Baby boomers are going to die. Millennials and Gen Z are gonna get this inheritance, and they're gonna get a lot of money. So our hopes, or my hopes at least, is that this money will be reapplied to sort of DeFi and solutions that we're talking about. But in order for that to happen, there needs to be more education. And at the end of the day, it's really ease of use. Like we've seen, the reason DVDs won over Blu-ray, why MP3s was adopted over other media formats. We always seem like in the marketing, especially, like it doesn't matter how good you get at marketing. At the end of the day, the consumer will decide if your product has a market for it or doesn't, right? You can tell me that Blu-ray was better than DVD and it had better quality, and it doesn't matter. DVDs was cheaper to build. They were able to secure distribution, and it just became the industry standard. I think that's the same thing with DeFi. But I don't think we should be trying to avoid going into politics. I think we need to support more progressive politicians. We do need to put our money where the mouth is, and I think we need to support those individuals that are going, that are pro crypto. And based on that, I have a question to Mel here, if I may connect. But how do you feel this government stance on crypto could impact the future of Theopetra and the future of DeFi in general? But do you see growing overseas first in a more crypto friendly space, and then bringing those lessons to the US?
Yeah, I thought about it for quite some time before launching Theo, and so I originally was born in Yugoslavia. There was a civil war, came out to America, and when I was thinking about it, I was like, I'm going to just launch in America. I'm going to just launch it here and see if we can do some actual good first, and see if that helps out our case. That's why Theo's logo is black and white. Which is, it's going to be binary. It's either going to work or it's not. It's either going to get completely stomped on or it'll do something. So I think the regulatory climate where we are is just, I think it's an embarrassment to America, because there should be, I think the bare minimum that what they should do is at least a sandbox for builders to say, hey, build this out, prove something, and then you can unleash it to the public. I think there needs to be maybe even a ramp up. But I definitely think where we're heading right now is a dangerous territory. I do think over the next 4 to 5 years, there will be pressures from other countries, and politicians will just be forced to pivot and start adopting it here, maybe loosening up, credited laws, et cetera. Or the complete opposite might happen, where it just gets stomped on, and then 10 years from now, this industry is just kind of, it's never going to be dead, but it could be crippled, on that end too. So yeah, I could see it moving either way, in my opinion.
I think in a lot of ways, there's a very good chance that our generation of crypto natives are going to be the man who planted the seeds that became trees that they never got to enjoy the shade from. Styled. What do you think about that? Do you think where do you think we are? Do you think in our lifetimes we're going to see this shiny new economy replacing this old broken thing, or that we're in for the long haul here?
I think that the answer's that we're going to see drastic change in our lifetime. I think Mel brings up a really good point that drastic change could very well be out and out authoritarianism. That could be the way that it goes. That's why I'm here fighting. Sorry, my Southern came out a little bit there. That's why I'm here fighting.
He's got that rifle in the back.
Yeah, come and take it. But that's why we're all here, right? Is because we see the movement in a tyrannical direction, and this is the story that's played out over and over and over again. Is strong men create good times create weak men create hard times, and then hard times create those strong men again, and which is why I promote the warrior pigeons, promoting the value of discipline and being that strong person that the people around you can rely on, and that I think will be the answer to whether or not it goes towards tyranny, is whether or not we have enough genuinely strong men and women. Sorry, I just used the term flippantly, to actually uphold the values that we truly believe in, as far as freedom and liberty and individual sovereignty.
Right, and it's good, and I'll always recommend to everybody, as we're getting ready to sign off here. I think if you're in this space at all, the most important books you could read are The Sovereign Individual, The Network State, and The Creature from Jekyll Island, which actually is what brought about this podcast, this idea that we are ready, that we have we inherited a system that was designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. And after that last financial crisis in 2008, we had a person or a group of people give us the weapon to go ahead and forge our own way. So these are highly, highly recommended books. Please, if you're in this space, you want to understand, some of the things at stake, that's where to start. We're just about out of time here, so I would be remiss if I didn't thank you all for joining us today. And you all will have an open invitation to come back whenever. This is a great discussion. So thank you. Any parting words, Diego?
I want to thank you for this space, Jack. I mean, I think this is part of the education that we're talking about. It is having these discussions. It is trying to reach a wider audience. And I'm really looking forward over the next, few years, what's to come. So I appreciate the space. And if anybody's looking, reach out. Diego May, it's the same user on Twitter. Reach out and love to talk.
Great. Mel, real quick.
Yeah, I would say thank you, Jack, for hosting this. And I feel like there needs to be more people producing content out there, so people can actually learn and get the grasp. And what I would say to anybody learning is just start with Bitcoin only, in the very beginning for maybe like 6 months to a year. Start with like $50, put in cold storage, learn the process there. Just get your foot under the ground before you go into even Thea Petra, before you touch anything else. Start there first, learn. And be a part of a community, and then use tools like Jack's articles, use tools like his podcasts, and then from there transition into other things that kind of fit your ideological pragmatic side as well. But start basic, learn, and don't really trust anyone initially. Just take your time is what I would say on that end.
And on that note, with that sage advice, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching. And please tune in the next time. If you enjoyed this, like and retweet it. We are going to grow. We are ready. See you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
See ya.
you.